Hi, everybody. My name's Arya. I'm the moderator of this lovely panel. And if you're guessing what all our panelists have in common is that I haven't fucked any of them. And I feel that's a really important statement to make because...
You're talking literally or figuratively here?
Because London is so big, and sometimes it seems in the gay community, in the gay scene, at least, that it's so tiny that if you threw a stone, you could hit your entire sexual history. And I find that it's amazing that we have such a diverse panel and so many different points of view here, where it could have easily have been one clique of people who all know each other really well and all kind of have the same point of view. So I'm really kind of happy that there's such a diverse range of people here. I'm going to get my phone out. I'm not being rude. I just have all my notes here. Hopefully I won't need to look at it too much. But I'll start by introducing everyone, and please kind of correct me if I'm wrong on, on anything here. We have Peter, who's a well-known human rights and LGBT campaigner, founder of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. And I feel if the gays are ever out for blood, it's probably his they'll be after. As my partner says, he does like to wind a lot of people up. We have Shireen, who's the author of Sex in the Citadel, Intimate Life in a Changing Arab World, which is one of the strongest intros to a book I've read in a long time. And I'm sure it's not the strongest part of the book, but I'm just a really slow reader. So I'm looking forward to reading more of your fascinating book. We have Asifa, who is the most visible British Muslim drag queen and star of the Channel 4 documentary Muslim Drag Queens. Also known for her activism and colorful, high-energy, explosive performances in music videos. We have Matt, who is the founder of the Matt and Naz Foundation, which was set up to help the parents of LGBTQ to tackle religious homophobia. And Kakan, did I get that right?
Correct.
Awesome. Founder of Birmingham South Asian LGBT Finding a Voice, which is Birmingham's first independent, multi-faith, non-funded social and support group for South Asian LGBTs. And we also have Sohail, who describes himself as a cultural Muslim, and through his studies into the theology behind progressive, gay-inclusive interpretations of Islam, will hopefully be able to answer questions like, well, what does the Quran really say about bumming? And me, well, I guess I'm here because Stephen Fry wasn't available. And I'm chairing it because I'm the least interesting person on this panel. Although I do have some insight into LGBTQ diaspora communities through the world of social media. And I've worked on campaigns for people like Sally El Hosseini on her amazing film, My Brother the Devil, which I won't spoil it for you, but you have to really see it, because if I just tell you what it's about, then it spoils the whole fun of it. But yes, thank you for everyone to showing up. It's quite daunting for me to sit in front of a sold-out crowd. But I'm so glad that you're here. You're really calming my nerves. It's great. And the wine. But I'd like to open the discussion with Shireen. I was wondering if you could give us kind of a brief history about your book and why you decided to write about it.
Well, I think I'll just preface my remarks by saying that although I focus on the Arab region, much of what I'm going to describe, the situation around sexuality, applies more widely to the broader Islamic world and also across the global south as well. So I just want to start by asking the audience a question. Everyone here a question? How many people have been to Cairo? The Egyptian government thanks you and hopes you will return. How many of you have visited the Citadel? Lady in the front, good, great. Lady in the front row, could you tell them what is the Citadel?
Is there a roving mic? Sorry.
I can't remember except the architecture. I can't remember as such. It was, I think this is where he killed the Mamlukis, the place. That's the part I know about it. I'm sorry, I'm not good in the history.
But the architecture she's referring to, it's the citadel is a fortress. It's an impregnable fortress. And I use it as a metaphor for sexual life in the Arab region. So the only socially accepted context for sexual activity is marriage. And of course, we're talking about heterosexual marriage. But it's not any old marriage. It's marriage that has to be approved by your family. It has to be approved by religion. And it has to be registered with the state. And anything outside of that is haram, forbidden, it's aib, it's shameful. We have this endless lexicon of reproof. And around this citadel, this impregnable fortress which resists any assault on that model for sexual life, we have this vast terrain of taboo around homosexuality, around premarital sex, abortion, you name it. And the taboo is reinforced by religion, or rather conservative interpretations of religion. It's buttressed by family control, and it's reflected in the law. Now, the reality, of course, is that millions of people are having sex outside the citadel. And these include, for instance, men and women who have sex with their own sex or who have a different gender identity. And please note that I'm not using the term LGBT for reasons that we can discuss later. But also outside the citadel are, for example, women who don't fit gender expectations, who are perhaps more educated, have gone on to get jobs, can't find a husband, don't want to get married. If they're having sex outside of marriage, they are also in this sort of forbidden territory. We also have sex workers, we have divorcees, for example. So there are many, many people outside the citadel. And the challenge for us is how are they going to realize what is a fundamental part of our humanity, the right to have a safe and pleasurable sexual life free of discrimination, violence, or coercion. Now, a gynecologist in Egypt really summed this up for me very nicely. He said, you know what, Shireen? In our part of the world, sex is the opposite of sport. Football, everybody talks about it, but hardly anyone plays it. But sex, everybody's doing it, but hardly anyone wants to talk about it. The reality, of course, is that people talk about sex all the time in our communities. Women are speaking with women, and men are speaking with men. The difficulty we have is taking this discourse into the public domain, whether it's media censorship, for instance, or the lack of sexuality education in schools, or the ability for us to do research on subjects related to sexuality. There is this veil of silence. And the real challenge, whether it's these issues of sexual LGBT or others who are outside the citadel, is to really bridge the gap between appearance and reality and bring these private discussions into the public domain, because they need to be heard.
Thank you. I think that is such a fascinating thing to acknowledge, and also kind of to turn it on its head and think about how we in the West approach that, especially with the recent Channel 4 documentary, which I'm sure you're all aware of, which there was a survey conducted which said that 50% of British Muslims think homosexuality should be illegal. And I mean, there's been a lot of controversy over the program, the survey itself. But what I found most interesting about the program, and kind of the most real, was, what was that guy's name? I know this is your favorite bit in it as well. Zorsis? Is it the guy who said...
Hamza Zorsis.
Hamza Zorsis, yeah. Right? Who, how would you describe him? He's like a preacher, like a YouTube preacher.
Pretty
hardcore, right? Yeah. And he was like, you know, if my neighbor's homosexual and he wants milk, I will give him my milk. Which is our favorite part of the documentary.
It's the most random and sexually charged thing to say.
Yeah, that we could say. And I know, like, I've personally kind of experienced, not his milk, but, you know, the idea that people will turn around and tell you, you know, I'm okay with homosexuals, but it's against my religion. I've even seen gay people, gay Muslims, who I know, you know, honey, if you have front row tickets to Rihanna, definitely gay. And and they're saying that, it's okay for other people to be gay. I don't have a problem with it, but it's against my religion. And I just wanted to throw this out to the panel. How do you feel when people say that, and what steps can we take creatively to kind of change their minds?
Wow, okay, so what a question to start with.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's interesting how 50%, if we take that poll into account, right, 50-odd% think that homosexuality should be legal. But then if you look at the other side, another 50% think that it's absolutely fine. I have conversations with Muslims left, right, and centre through social media, through face-to-face, in my own family, in my extended family community, etc., etc. And hand on heart, actually, it could be the people I'm coming into contact with, but the majority of them actually are absolutely fine about it. And this idea that it's against my religion does come into play. And I feel that if people were actually allowed to just voice that, if they were allowed to just say that they were supportive of LGBT Muslims, or LGBT communities in general, then that would be fine. It's just that they don't feel they can comfortably, outwardly say that in today's society. And I think that in itself presents another issue, that people can't, people that are allies or want to support or want to actually voice their real acceptance and tolerance of communities aren't allowed to do so. And if they're feeling that fear, what do you think we feel? So I guess that's my sort of stance on that to start with.
So
Can I,
oh, sorry.
can I pipe in there?
Yeah, sure.
It's true that 52%, according to this poll, said that homosexuality should be banned, and 48% didn't say it should be banned. They weren't approving of homosexuality. They weren't saying it's fine at all. They were just simply saying that they didn't agree with banning. And I think you're right to make a distinction between what people of any faith believe about homosexuality and what they would do to an LGBT person face to face. Now, if I can extract it from the Muslim issue, my mother is a Christian fundamentalist. She believes that according to the Bible, homosexuality is wrong. She thinks it's a sin, but in terms of the hierarchy of sins, a pretty minor one if it's between consenting adults. But also, she thinks that discrimination and prejudice against LGBT people is an even worse sin. And so therefore she supports the principle of legal equality, and she would oppose any form of discrimination. I think if we look at the trajectory of where the Muslim community has come from and is going to, I see progress in the right direction. It's slow, it's not as far as LGBT Muslims would like, but it's moving in the right direction. And I'm quite happy to, for the moment at least, be in a situation where the Muslim community or the Christian community or the Sikh or Hindu communities say that in their personal view homosexuality is wrong, but they themselves would not discriminate, they would not treat a gay person disrespectfully, they would not support legal inequality. I think that is progress.
I think I'm going to pick up from that, and a few years ago, Muslims would have said that it's actually wrong to be gay, that being gay in and of itself as a thing is haram. Now the discourse has somewhat shifted in the right direction, and now people say, well, actually, it's okay for you to be gay. You're naturally gay, you can't help it. But it's wrong, the act is wrong. Now, obviously, that's still bad. That's not where we want to be, but it's progress. And it means it's actually, even though it might seem like a small thing, it's a really big step in the right direction.
Can I add something to that, please? Where I have a particular objection with how that was portrayed in that documentary was there was, I forget the exact term, was it, homosexuality has to be banned or it's against the law. Well, the thing is, if you're born gay, then what does actually banning or making it illegal mean? Because what it actually means, in my view of the world, is that banning it means, well, it means you shouldn't exist as a person. And I represent Nazamat Foundation, and the reason why I'm here is because my fiance, who I met 15 years ago, and we ran away to London to find freedom. And the thing is, if the very point of banning means that my fiance killed himself, he ended his own life because banning and being against the law was something maybe in his mind on that moment in time, then surely what does banning and making it illegal mean? Because does that mean you have to exclude yourself and take yourself out of being alive? Because surely what does that term mean? Because it's very damaging to many people who saw that statement. Because how can you avoid being yourself?
A couple of things. I do research on with tens of thousands of men and women across the Arab region, and the one thing we know about surveys is that people lie.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, it's something called social desirability. People will tell you what they think they should be saying, and so the best way to get at these sort of questions is not to do, you know, knock on someone's door or telephone them, but to engage in one-on-one discussion.
And I think what is also fascinating is your background in kind of researching HIV in communities, and kind of I've worked on a project with MTV. It's a drama series called Sugar, which is really amazing. If you get a chance to check it out, it's called MTV Sugar. Lupita Nyong'o, her first role was given to her by MTV, and I think the Daily Mail did a whole scandal, like, ooh, Lupita in sex shame, and it's like, it was a program about HIV in Africa, in Nigeria specifically. And so we were working to kind of get people tested and get statistics and kind of get people to open up and talk about it within their families and kind of get rid of the stigma of HIV. And what you've mentioned in the introduction of your book, which I've read, I've read that much of it, is you're saying that there's such a lack of information in the Arab region.
But just to pick up on the point of that Peter was making, and also Sahel, and I think we need to be very careful about which Muslim populations you're speaking about. You know, I think in Western democracies, you are seeing possibly a move in the right direction. I think if one looks at Muslim populations elsewhere in the Islamic world, I mean, quite frankly, there is a move in the opposite direction in much the Islamic world. But I think we need to understand why is that happening. I mean, there has been a rise of Islamic fundamentalism over the past couple of decades, and it's really interesting that it focuses on sexuality as this sort of fracture line between East and West. So, you know, so we, the good Easterners and the good Muslims, we don't do this stuff. This stuff comes from the West, therefore we must reject it. You know, the interesting point about all this is that 1,000 years ago, these roles were completely reversed. I can tell you that medieval Christian commentators, when they looked at Islam, one of their major criticisms of this upstart faith was, how can the Prophet Muhammad possibly be a messenger of God? This man is so sexed up. And the reason for that is that we spoke very frankly about all shades of sexuality. Haram, halal, didn't really matter. It was there in the literature. Many of these books were written by religious scholars. And we have lost that frankness. It's great if it's being sort of, if there's a move in a more open and progressive direction amongst Muslims living in the West, but we've got a long way to go in much of the Islamic world.
I just want to say that going back to that documentary, they said that 52% said think gays should be illegal. But you know, when you look at the demographics of where the communities that they went into, you know, they'll say they interviewed 1,000 people, but only 500, just over 500, said it should be illegal. But when you look at the demographics of the areas that they came from areas such as Bradford, which has a high density, high population of Muslim community. They went to Leicester, which again is predominantly... But
not just high density of Muslims, but kind of very gated and very kind of segregated. And the idea that... and another thing that the poll did touch upon, I mean, I don't mean to legitimize all of it, but they also said that a percentage of people never mix with white people, or they never, you know, go to a white person's house. So... In that context, that's what you're kind of saying.
Yeah, it's akin to saying, so I don't know, it's a bit like saying they interviewed so many 1,000 people from the EDL, and the EDL says that, you know, blacks and white peoples ought to be persecuted and executed straight away. You know, do we believe that? No, because it's a snapshot of certain viewpoints.
Absolutely.
You know, and when we go talk about the Quran and what Muslims really say, you know, when I came out 25 years ago, and I was trying to come to terms with my sexual orientation, I read the Quran and the Bible, and throughout the whole stories, as it were, I was trying to think, what does it say about homosexuality? I could not find anything. Yes, people reference Sodom and Gomorrah, and they reference Prophet Lot, but specifically about homosexuality is a sin, I could not read anything there. So now what I find is when I'm talking to other Muslims and they say it's a sin, you know, or they might say, I accept you, but, you know, that's whatever floats your boat. You know, that's fine as well. But I kept saying, okay, have you read the Quran? Yeah. What language are you reading it in? Are you reading it in Arabic or are you reading it in English? Oh, I read it in Arabic. Okay. Do you understand it? No. So how do you know homosexuality is a sin? Because my mom told me, my community leader told me. Oh, okay, so you're listening to Chinese whispers. Don't listen to what other people are telling you. Listen to what your heart tells you. And if your heart tells you to accept this person, regardless of their sexual orientation or identity, go with the flow, please. Because otherwise, we're just going to be one complete fucked up country and world at this rate.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought up the whole Arabic thing, because as a child growing up in Iran, studying Arabic is mandatory. Praying is mandatory. They force you to pray in school. And this is why I kind of, it was my rebellion to rebel against all of this. Like, I'm not doing that, but of course I had to. But this leads nicely into my next question for Sahel. What does the Quran actually say about bumming? And do you need an advanced degree in Arabic to interpret it the way it should be?
Actually, you might laugh at him saying, what does the Quran say about bumming? It actually does specifically refer to anal sex. So actually, that's quite, that's actually a good use of terminology there. Actually, the word homosexuality in the Quran isn't mentioned. In fact, the Islamic jurists had to invent a term, luti. It had to be kind of invented by jurists after that, after kind of the Quran was revealed. But in terms of the Quran, if you can, the original classical and traditional interpreters of the Quran didn't have the understanding that we have now of sexuality. We now know that homosexuality and other sexualities are natural, that they're unchangeable. Psychiatrists agree. We've tried to change sexuality here in this country even. It failed. We know we can't change sexuality. Now, with that knowledge, we can then kind of look at the story of Lut. And the story of Lut talks about men who had sex with men. Now, if you look at the context in which that is mentioned, the men who were having sex with men, they were also kind of committing violent acts. And if you place the act of sex with men having sex with men within the context of violence, that gives you rape, men raping men. Now, according to the traditional understanding of the story, the people of Lut were punished because they were gay and they were committing gay acts. Now, you can kind of approach it from a rational perspective and ask yourself, can an entire town of people be gay? Firstly, that doesn't make sense. Secondly, if the entire town of people was gay, they would have quickly kind of ceased to exist because there would have been no kids, right? So kind of looking at that and then looking at the overarching themes in the Quran of compassion, of justice. The Quran talks about how your internal nature, your fitrah, cannot be changed. Looking at those themes, placing everything within that context, you can then come up with the understanding that actually what the story of Lut is referring to is men raping men. And that actually is supported by the Quran's own narration of basically what happened is that this is how the story goes. Angels came, visited the Prophet Lut, disguised as men. And what happened is that his people, the people of Lut, in a mob tried to rape those two visitors of his in order to undermine his authority. Now, again, they're using rape in an attempt to reject the prophethood of Lut. Now, the jurist Ibn Hazm, the classical jurist, actually said that the people of Lut were not punished because they were gay. They were punished because they rejected the prophethood of Lut and they rejected God. Now, this is a classical jurist, like hundreds of years ago, who actually came up with this. He disagreed with the other kind of, the majority kind of consensus, which was that actually they were punished for homosexuality. He disagreed with that. And LGBT reformers and reformist thinkers can actually, they build upon that understanding that Ibn Hazm had and build from there. So actually, the Quran, it doesn't refer to homosexuality as a sexuality, but it does refer to men having sex with men. But within that context, it's referring to rape.
And what about the hadiths?
The hadith, Well, actually, that's a good question that you bring up.
Can we just raise this?
Yeah.
Can we just read one of the classic?
Okay, go ahead.
This is one of the all-time favorites. That's top of the pops when it comes to hadiths to condemn homosexuality. When the male mounts another male, the angels are alarmed and raise a cry to their Lord. The wrath of the Mighty One comes down upon those men, and the curse covers them, and the tempters surround them. The earth asks its Lord for permission to swallow them up, and the divine throne grows heavy upon those who bear it up, etc., etc.
If only my sex was that good. Talk about earth-shattering.
Yeah, the earth really did move there, didn't it? Over to you on your thoughts.
I'm glad that you read that hadith out, because if you look at this, when it comes to hadith science, studying hadith, there's different kinds of hadith. Now, there's one type of hadith which is known as a mutawatir hadith, which is at the same level of authenticity as the Quran within Islamic science. Now, only a handful of hadith, some scholars say only around 80, are actually mutawatir, and they refer to the basics of belief, the 5 pillars, how to pray, etc. None of the hadith that refer to homosexuality or homosexual acts are mutawatir hadith. In fact, not only are they not mutawatir hadith, they are actually pretty weak. If you look at the chain of narration, the transmission, there are a lot of weak narrators in there. So therefore, you can actually disregard all of those hadith that refer to homosexuality. And actually, this isn't something that is kind of a new thing. This is something that was brought about, which was practiced by the Zahiri madhab. They actually only took from the mutawatir hadith. So we actually have a precedent within the Islamic tradition of treating the hadith like that.
And so what do people say when you tell them that? They say, oh, being gay is haram, the hadith said da-da-da-da-da.
It's interesting. Some people have actually turned around and said, you know what you're saying makes sense. And other people have just said, well, actually it's because they're so they've been brought up with it. They're like, no, this is wrong, that's bad. What you're saying is, you're Western, something like that.
Yeah.
There are also some Muslims who reject the hadith.
Yeah.
They say the Quran alone is the word of God. In fact, the Quran itself says, this is Allah's message. It is complete. It requires no interpretation and no addition.
Yeah.
So if you took that interpretation, you would say that the hadiths and all the other stuff is completely irrelevant to true Islam.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Quranists that you're speaking of, for instance, I mean, one of the problems we have in Islam is that in the heartlands of Islam, we're working in patriarchal, authoritarian systems. I mean, basically dictatorships, more or less. And the religion gets subsumed into the politics. So the Islam becomes what the prevailing political powers want you to believe. And as a consequence of that, when the governments want to clamp down on sexuality and want to make scapegoats of LGBT populations, they will twist and they will turn the religion to this end. So the politics and the religion have always been entwined in Islam, but particularly now we're seeing quite a toxic mix in many of our countries.
What happens is that gay people are seen as having a Western disease, and when they kind of push the so-called gay agenda, they're kind of pushing a Western agenda and trying to Westernize the population, and seeing as there's a lot of hatred towards the West within Muslim communities and in Muslim countries. That's where the politics and the kind of religion all come together, and it's seen as kind of, trying to at least bash the West somehow by bashing LGBT people, using them as a proxy.
Yeah. So I'd like to now kind of shift the attention from what we've just talked about and onto kind of real-world experiences that we are having in the UK within Muslim communities. And Matt, I would really appreciate if you could tell us about some of the work that you do with your foundation and some of the experiences that you've had. Okay,
thank you. So to answer that question, I mean, I spoke very briefly about Naz and what happened to Naz, but to answer the question in a kind of a wider view, what I've done is I've actually gone through the hundreds of stories that have been sent to our foundation. Sometimes they ask for help, and sometimes they just want to be heard. And I've just summarised just a couple of stories from around the UK which answer your question. This one is in the north of the UK. This young gentleman, because of his family's view of the faith that they all follow, he's had to change countries, he's changed names, he's run away from the very family that gave birth to him. The family used solicitors to argue, because he was homosexual, that he was no longer sane in mind, and therefore the solicitors were out to try and seize all assets and financial savings from the individual because he was gay, and they argued because he was gay he was therefore not sane. In the Midlands, very recently, a gentleman emailed me to say he's desperately in love with the man of his dreams. The family are tapping his phones. They're listening behind the door. They're looking at the web browsing history on his computer when he's not at home, and his siblings have turned against him. Another story from the Midlands, this time in the East. The family follow him when he's out of the family home. They go through his personal belongings. They read his text messages. He's been physically hit. He's been verbally abused. And just recently I've heard a few very disturbing stories where whole families have actually pretty much distanced themselves from their children the moment they come out. And this often results in, like I said, the verbal abuse, the horror, the torture, making them move out of home, making them feel like they're not worthy to be an individual. And the thing is, often it's based on the fact that they can be cured, the fact that there's a cure, they can be sent to a psychiatrist to remove this gayness that's within them. And sadly, unfortunately, there's a trend, well, it's not a trend, but it's more of so many similarities in so many of the stories. But I just have to say it's my duty, the foundation that I'm behind, we don't just tackle one religion, we tackle all religions. And sadly, there's a commonality across many of the different religions. So it's not just this one religion that we're talking about tonight. It kind of touches upon all the religions that we've been contacted about.
I was actually personally exorcised, so I was sent for ruqya. So basically, my parents said, well, you're possessed, that's why you're gay. Well, actually, they didn't agree that I was gay. They said that there was no sign with you since you were a kid. Basically, I didn't play with Barbie dolls and stuff. Exactly. So they said, you're not gay. We would have known. And they sent me to an exorcist. And so basically, the guy was reading Quran, the guy who's the exorcist guy. He's reading Quran, and he's asking me, do you feel any different? And I just felt like saying, I still feel gay. Yeah. But like my dad was there and I couldn't say that. Yeah. But unfortunately,
what did you say?
I said I still feel the same. But after that, my parents exercised me themselves at home, and you know, it was extremely distressing because when you're kind of in like that situation and you're surrounded by that and it's all happening, you start thinking to yourself, wait, maybe I am possessed. Even though, like, rationally, you know, it doesn't make sense. Like, just emotionally, on a very human level, you start thinking, maybe I am possessed. And I started thinking that. And I became extremely suicidal. And, you know, I even attempted to take my life, and my dad kind of stopped me in, like, halfway through. And that's when I decided I had to leave home. So, like, these...
So that next time he couldn't stop you.
Exactly.
So, very, very dark sense of humor. I'm sorry, guys.
So it's like these things happen, and they're happening a lot more often than you think.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot more.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And they're also happening close-knit, loving families as well.
Yeah,
you
of
know,
course.
my family, my background was, you know, I'm the youngest of 7. I thought we were all very much close-knit, very loving, very caring. We all sort of interacted very well. When I came out to my mum, obviously it devastated her, but she said, you know, whatever makes you happy makes me happy, and if I didn't love you as my own son, regardless of who you're in love with, what kind of mum am I? So that was fine, you know, she accepted me completely. My dad, on the other hand, because he was a founder member of Birmingham Central Mosque, he thought more about the community, what his peers would think, etc. So that created a lot of friction, but eventually he accepted me and my partner, in fact, to the point where a few years down the line, he said, the only thing that's missing from your household now is having a child. And I was like, oh my God, what is he saying? He's about 70 years old, and he's saying that to me. And that was before it became legal for LGBT people to adopt or foster. But with my siblings, it was a completely different story. My eldest sister, we were so close, she took me to one side and she said, perhaps you could marry. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, you could marry, and you know, whatever you do behind the scenes, that'll be left to you. And I said, well, that's unfair, not only on the wife, but, you know, what if I can't function and I can't give you grandchildren? And she said, well, we can find ways and means to adopt and foster.
Always meddling older
always ways
sister.
and means.
Yeah.
My brother, on the other hand, he physically assaulted me, you know, so that threw me back. My other brother took me again to one side. He queried my sexual activities. What did I do in the bedroom? How often, etc., etc. And I was like, slow down, because you know, you are heterosexual, clearly. You're heterosexual, you've had girlfriends.
The family can't deal with two gays at once.
I do not ask you what you do in your bedroom. So why are you asking me? And surely you're a man of the world, you know more than that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it does come not just from families where they might be traditional or conservative or orthodox, but also families that appear to be liberal, very much anglicised or westernised. So it's coming from all grounds. And, you know, like the panel are saying here, that you know, something has to be done in order to move it forward. It's not just about religion, it's about culture, it's about communities, it's about individuals moving with the times.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, sure.
Just this week I was contacted by a gentleman in Pakistan, and he's desperately in love with the man of his dreams, and he wanted me to reiterate and articulate the separation of the sexual act and also falling in love with somebody from the same gender.
Yeah.
And he had his own view, but he wanted me to say it out loud back to him. And one of the things is, when parents, they have this negative view of you because you're now seen as this gay individual, now you've come out. And the thing is, do you think about your parents when they go back home? When you leave the house, do you think about what your parents are doing behind that closed door? You just don't want to think about the sexual act that your parents are getting up to. So why should they have the right to think about anything that you're going to do behind a closed room, door with the person that you absolutely love? And just one more thing I just want to add is it's really important as well, is that the thing that's what we've seen through the foundation is it's so hard often because there's this struggle to cope with loving your parents and not wanting to disappoint them. You know, you want the unconditional love of your parents, but at the same time you want the freedom to be able to love the person that you absolutely love.
Sure.
So it's when the two are challenged, when the two are opposites, and the parents won't allow you to love the person that you love, it's where do you go? Because if you just want the unconditional love of your parent,
absolutely,
and they just reject you, where do people go?
Can I just add that also, I mean, it's good that we focus on the negatives and the suffering, the real suffering of LGBTI Muslims, but there are some positive stories as well.
Yeah.
There are people in the Muslim community who do embrace their LGBT sons and daughters, uncles, aunts, whatever. And I'd like to pay tribute tonight to Adnan Ali, who founded the first LGBT Muslim organization in this country, Al-Fatiha, in the 1990s. A real pioneer, a real trailblazer. He stuck his neck out at a time when it was so difficult. He was almost a lone voice. But here's a good example of how his family did accept him and embrace him and his partner. So there are positive stories. But on the negative side, when we launched our this is the Peter Tatchell Foundation launched our LGBT Muslim Solidarity campaign last October to try and build bridges between the LGBT and Muslim communities. One of the people who turned up at the protest was a youngish Muslim man who told this horrendous story. He lived in Whitechapel. His neighbours discovered that he was gay and all turned against him. They'd respected him previously. He'd gone fine with them, never any problems. But as soon as they knew or suspected he was gay, suddenly he was literally terrorised and forced out of his flat by, he said, virtually the whole Muslim neighbourhood. Another story I'll tell you is that in 1998, I think it was, when Outrage organised a protest outside House of Parliament when MPs were voting on the age of consent, a young Muslim guy about 19 turned up and spoke to the cameras about why the law should be equalised. His family members saw him on the TV. He was kidnapped by male relatives and held a prisoner in a basement, in a cellar in one of their houses, tied to a chair, burned with cigarettes until they were absolutely convinced that he was going to give up being gay. A final example is, a few years ago, I had a tearful Muslim woman phone me to tell her story of how her brother was discovered to be gay. He was tricked into going back to Pakistan, and he was hacked to death with machetes in the back garden of the family. Now, she wanted to go to the police, but she was terrified they'd kill her too if she dared dishonour the family and, implicate the family in the murder. So these are real, grave human rights abuses. And what I find so distressing is most LGBT organizations will not touch this issue. They're afraid of being labeled racist or anti-Muslim, and therefore they just look the other way when LGBTI Muslims are some of the most persecuted, vilified, and suffering of our entire community, yet most LGBT organizations will not address the issue. I think that's really, really shameful.
Absolutely. I'd like to just point out that the things that Peter has just described don't exclusively happen within the Muslim community, that the Sikh community and other communities also have similar levels of violence and intolerance within them. And I just wanted to kind of share with you my story of coming out to my parents. I was very close with my mother, and it really surprised me that she was the one, and she's very hippie-ish and smokes weed, and this is probably like the top of the list of things I shouldn't do, according to her, is go and stand in front of a room full of people and talk about my sexuality. Oh, the shame on the family. And she said, no one will marry your sister. Why are you doing this? Why are you saying this? We'll take you to a doctor to see if you're really gay. And my father, with whom I had a very, very patchy relationship, actually turned around and said, I love you, you're still my son. And behind my back, he actually found a support group for parents of LGBTs. And this is why the work that you do is so important, Matt, because my father benefited from that hugely. And now we have such a solid relationship, and it's amazing. You know, he comes around for dinner with me and my partner. And, you know, I would never, ever have seen that outcome when I came out to my parents, that my mother would be so kind of rejecting, and my father would actually be supportive. But moving on from that...
Oh, and what happened to your sister?
Oh, my sister. My sister was kind of like... I came out to her first, and I think she kind of knew, but I kind of called her up. She was in Iran with my mother, and she said, you cannot do this to the family right now. Why are you being so selfish? And she kind of stood aside and didn't support me in that. And we also used to be very, very close, and I think we will never get that bond back again, unfortunately. But I'd like to move on. Oh, hello.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned that story that what your parents said about your sister. My parents said the exact same thing. They said, no one will marry your sisters. And I said, why? Because they'll be worried that their children will turn out to be gay as well.
Yeah.
So that's my parents said that. And I had to really carefully consider that before I started doing my activism stuff. And I still think about that all the time.
I think that's something that, you know, why aren't there more visible gay Muslims in media campaigning and standing up for rights, and even just Muslims who are supportive of LGBT communities?
It's honor culture.
It is.
You lose your honor and you lose your status, and everything falls apart.
But it's not just your honor, it's the collective honors. I mean, that's the big problem about us being able to exercise any sort of sexual rights, whether you're lesbian, gay, transsexual, or you're just a single woman who wants to have sex outside of marriage. Because how can you have sexual rights when you don't even have individual rights, when you exist in this collective context?
The most honourable thing to do is to love your children unconditionally, period.
Absolutely. So I think we are out of time for our panel, and I'm sure you guys have lots of questions to ask us, so I'd like to open to the floor. I think we have about 45 minutes of questions time. There's a roving mic over there. Yes, the gentleman in the white tie.
Question per se first. I have two comments.
Oh, you can only have questions, no opinions. God forbid you have an opinion.
That's haram.
Please.
So, I think it was Sohail who was saying that we have made progress because the conversation now is that people are saying, yeah, it's okay, you know, if you're gay and it's natural, but if you don't act on it, there's this, then it's not a problem, right? But we need to acknowledge again that conversation is happening in Western liberal democracies, like Shireen, right? Shireen mentioned it's happening on the opposite spectrum in Muslim-dominant countries. That conversation isn't happening, so I don't think it's progressing in Muslim-dominant countries. There is this schism and split between homosexuality in the West. It's constructed as integrated in your personality, it's one aspect of your identity. It is more relegated as an act that you can refrain from in Muslim-dominant countries and in predominantly Muslim cultures. So, and then also when Matt mentioned that, was it that you mentioned, I'm not remembering, so I'll skip the comment. But I will say the other thing is I was really happy that you, Arya, you mentioned that the sister, the siblings in the family, there is a reflection when we come out. There can be a reflection on our siblings in terms of marriage prospects, etc. So when you shared that your sister, took you to the side and said, I advise you not to or get married, that's a problem that a lot of us confront. My sister as well, like when I came out at the age of 19, I was very surprised. My sister, being educated and born in the United States, had a very strong negative reaction. And to this day, like she's okay with it with her Western friends, but in Muslim like with her Muslim friends, it's not something that's spoken about, and it's very hush hush. So it's a complicated family dynamic. Obviously, it doesn't just impact parents. It is a collective family issue that's confronted when you come out.
Actually, Asifa, I actually was dying to ask you about this because you've actually talked to your imam about possible solutions. Like, okay, well, what do I do? And the answer he gave you was, get married or abstain from sexual acts, which is, completely absurd, I think. But also there's another layer of complexity, I think, to your experience, being gender fluid, and kind of, I just wonder, are you more accepted within the Muslim community as Asifa rather than Asif, the practicing homosexual man who's out to get their men?
No, to be honest, I don't think I'm accepted for both, to be honest, if I'm entirely honest with you. I think my coming out story has been like widely publicized, and I'm glad actually more and more people are talking more about coming out as LGBT Muslims now. In terms of me as Asif and Asifa, very much so, like, when I came out, I was Asif. I hadn't started drag at that point in my life. And very similarly to Sohail and to Kakan and other LGBT Muslim experiences, I was actually taken to my GP, first of all. And Dr. Singh and Dr. Patel couldn't prescribe anything at all. And they actually stuck up for me. These were South Asian doctors in their 60s that actually stuck up for me and said, Mr. and Mrs. Qureshi, there's nothing that we can, prescribe for Asif. And then I was taken to my mom. And then, as you say, celibacy, marriage. I entered like a 6-month engagement with my first cousin in Pakistan. And I woke up one day and decided, nope, I'm gay. I can't go ahead with that. I'm glad I did that. For me, just being a Asifa has just allowed it really to just take the issue and take it out there into the media and take it out there it's just allowed me to be fully self-expressed around the issue. And I think what worked for me at the time before doing drag was what my imam agreed to was actually me, I was always a very confident person and always great at, defending myself. And, when he got that I couldn't sexually commit to another woman, that I couldn't abstain, the way he got it right for himself was, okay, enter into a civil partnership. That was the only thing that was available then. And commit yourself to just one person. So it wasn't really, for him, in the end, it wasn't even about same-sex activity. It was about monogamy more than anything else. Yeah. And the other thing that he said was, don't promote it, don't talk about it. Yeah. And that obviously went out the window.
Here we are.
So, and I still firmly believe that that's probably what it comes down to even today, is these things should not be talked about because they're haram, or, it's essentially about sex itself, actually talking about sex, that is the issue. regardless of whether it's same-sex issue. It's just an issue of sex. Sex.
So does anyone have any questions relating to sex and sexual acts?
Yeah, I mean,
Do you have a question?
well, without sex, I'd just probably have a breakdown. But no, but it's true. But it's true though, because picking up on what Asifa has said about within the Muslim community or South Asian communities in general, there are a number of subject matters that we don't discuss about. One of them primarily is sex, and the other one is mental health. Now, when somebody who identifies or they're coming to terms with being LGBT, we don't talk about how it impacts an individual through their mental health, how it creates anxieties, depression, low self-esteem, confidence, etc., etc. So, you know, they do work hand in hand, and, you know, it does go back to what Asifa says, that we do need to be more expressive, more sort of articulate in how we come to terms with our identities and to talk about it more, because South Asian communities, Muslim communities, it's like, you want to talk about sex, don't talk about it. You watch it on the sex scenes on the television, switch the channel over.
I mean,
talk about
like British as well, no sex, please, just cups of tea.
You know, it does work. You know, there's a high rate of LGBT people committing suicide. There's a high rate of people with mental health issues as well. Not to say that it correlates together, but it's about how it impacts on individuals.
No, it does correlate together. It definitely correlates.
You know, but how people don't seem to realise, they seem to segregate this issue to that issue to that issue. But what we need to do is take the holistic approach and say, what is going on with this individual?
Yes.
And we don't seem to do that. And maybe it's time to, the 21st century, it's time to talk, isn't it, as the campaign says.
And can I just say, the joke is that I'm sure, I mean, there's so many stories and hadiths of people of the Prophet's time actually going to the Prophet and talking about all sorts of health issues relating to health. And yet we're in a position here, right, today in 2016 where that isn't happening, and we can't talk about certain issues within a wider community context. They are kept hush-hush, they are kept within immediate family circles because of that fear that, above more than anything else, take religion out of it. It's just community backlash.
Yeah.
People are scared of community backlash.
But this reticence is relatively recent, actually. What's very interesting, if you look particularly in the Arab region, at the long history of Arabic erotica, which basically went from about the 8th century to the 19th century and started to close down when the Europeans moved in. I'm telling you, there is nothing in the Joy of Sex or YouPorn or, dare I say it, 50 Shades of Grey that they were not covering in Baghdad 1,000 years ago. And we have these fabulous, endless books about homosexual practices, everything under the sun.
I really need to go to the library to check it out. One of my favorite subjects.
But this incredibly sophisticated understanding of trans, what we today would call transgender, not transsexual back at that time, but transvestite, incredibly sophisticated understanding, and in many cases a real appreciation of what they would call a lifestyle. Yeah. And that's all been lost, but it is in our heritage, certainly as Arabs, but also more widely in the Muslim world.
But that also reminds me, my dad, bless him, sense of humor like mine, I think, once joked that that's my partner laughing there. Once joked that maybe we should have had you a sex change because then it might be better. Ha 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 ha. Of course, he was just joking, but it's very kind of real, this idea that in Iran, I think the government sponsors sex changes, and I think that's because Khomeini had a bit on the side, and it would have been okay for him to do that if it was outwardly acceptable.
Do you know? I think the idea of homosexuality comes down to, and this is a lot in Arab culture and in South Asian culture, it's not the penetrator that is homosexual, it's the one being penetrated, and essentially the effeminate one.
Yes.
You know.
The shame that
comes with that. Yes, the shame that comes with that. And I think
the same shame for women, I suppose.
Yes, and I think the boundaries definitely in the Islamic world around gender are so rigid in the sense that, women have to be women, have to do women's role, have to be women, act like women, as do men. Men have to be men, wear men's clothing, act like men, do the men's role. So that sort of plays a part in it. And I think that's the interesting relationship that the Islamic and South Asian world has with the trans community. Because, and Sohail will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but there were trans men and women that stayed with the Prophet's wives. Yeah. And, you know, before the British went to South Asia, those penal codes weren't there to sort of decriminalize against homosexuality and trans community.
Absolutely.
And it's only now, actually, in the last 2 years, that all the South Asian countries now have equal rights for trans communities. But when it comes to LGB, it's a no-go area.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting relationship we have.
Yeah. On that point, I think the Iranian transgender program is very evil and sinister.
Yes.
Yes.
Its purpose is to eradicate homosexuality.
Yes.
It's to force and pressure LGBT people to become trans, or you know, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people.
And then possibly
to become
into
trans
sex work.
as a way of eradicating what they see as the problem.
Yeah. Can we go to the lady in the front here?
Well, it's not a question. It's a couple of facts. I put them together. When I try to write about human rights, including gays' rights, in a very subtle way, I use few arguments. One of them is that history is written by the winners, and there is no way, I mean, if it exists today, it must have existed in the past. It's just they covered it up. That's number one. Number two is that if I want to believe in a God, there is an ayah which says that وَخَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, which means that it's God has created you this way. And the third thing, it is a biological thing. It has nothing to do with I mean, you are what you are, and we have to accept them rather than putting our heads in the sand like the ostrich. So we have, and we have to acknowledge their right to be whatever they do. Of course, I get a lot of negative stuff, you know, comments and God knows what, but these are facts. If I want to believe in a God,
yes,
you know, I want to take a positive angle, and that's the only way. Perhaps it might help you, might add to your argument or defend or whatever. So, thank you.
Thank you. That actually reminded me of something really strange. I think Iran attempted the World Guinness record for the longest ostrich meat sandwich, but they didn't manage to complete it because people kept on coming up to the table and eating it. They thought it was free food. Typically Iranian. The gentleman over here, please.
Thank you very much. Quick comment about sex, since we're talking about it. What's interesting about in Bangladesh, because I work with Boys of Bangladesh quite a lot, and also another secret lesbian group in Bangladesh, is actually it's the middle class that suffer, because the poor working classes in the villages, they have sex with each other. It's just a thing you do, you hide it, you get married, whatever. Obviously the upper class can talk about it, there's language to describe what's happening in secret places, blah, blah, blah. The middle class don't have that. My question is about shame. So I work with apostasy, particularly ex-Muslims, and as you can imagine, a lot of the same stuff that happens, also lots of LGBT people. And what I found as a quirk, actually, is coming out can sometimes help you because your family is under shame if they hurt you. So what's been happening is when we've had members come out publicly and say, I don't believe, the families are actually sometimes less likely to be really, really shit to them because you get seen as that crazy Paki family. You know what I mean? So and I mean that as a...
In a middle class context.
In a middle class context, yeah. So you don't want to be that crazy Pakistani, Bangladeshi family. So for some reason, it seems to protect it. Have you guys seen that with the people who are very out and about, like Asifa? You've gone out way like there, compared to people who don't come out that much. And the second question for Shireen is, what have you seen that's actually worked in the Middle East? What are the initiatives? like Helm, for example. For me, Helm seems to have worked somewhat. What would you say have worked in the Middle East? So those are two sneaky questions.
So the first question is shame. What examples of shame have you seen from not people who are completely out there, but for people who are kind of just out and about? And
can you use shame positively in a way to shame the families that are trying to be homophobic to the kids?
Okay, so I think maybe this is a question for you, Matt, since you work directly to challenge homophobia, of the parents, religious homophobia.
I wish I could give you the positive answer to this, but I can give you a very close and personal answer to the shame topic. When when Naz passed away, not all of his family knew. And just the day after Naz passed away, I was told, you know, when I believed morally it was the right thing to do at the time, but I was told not to discuss with anyone, particularly in the family, that Naz was gay. And the shame that it would bring on the family would, first of all, hurt his soul. It would hurt the family. And the third thing, which is what, you know, secured that argument to me was, and you certainly wouldn't want Naz's memory to be a shameful memory that would hurt his family. And for months afterwards, it was still that argument that I had to keep up until finally I broke. And it was don't discuss that Naz was gay, even though his mother knew, but don't discuss it with his other parents, don't discuss it with anyone in the family. You do not want to bring shame on the family. So even in death, shame must not be brought on the family. So I wish I could answer in a positive way, but unfortunately I see a lot of the negative views, which is the shame, and it's I'm sorry, but it's not acceptable shame, because really the beauty is in everyone, and really we've talked about honour, and really maybe the opposite of shame is honour, and the honourable thing to do is to accept that person that you gave birth to. So I'm sorry, I can't give a positive answer to that.
So I guess, Peter, maybe it's something, again, going back to your comment where you say none of the LGBT organizations will kind of stand behind gay Muslims. They don't want to touch that. So maybe it's like the situation that gay Muslims don't even feel like they have the support from the gay community to stand up and say, look, what my parents are doing, it's evil, it's unacceptable. Because when you get to that point, that maybe just the support isn't there.
I'd like to hear from Kakan.
Sorry?
I'd like to hear from you.
I had, going back to, I said my coming out story was, but at the time it was emotional and turbulent. I had the whole thing about getting married, the shame, the izzat, what would the community think, especially from my father. Mostly from my father, because he was the master of the household, as it were, and he kept talking about the community, about the extended family, and he just went on and on. And every time I tried to talk to him, he'd shut down completely at that point. So I chose, maybe I was being disrespectful towards him or selfish, I don't know, but I chose to withdraw myself from that situation. I took myself out of the family household for about a year. And I was with my partner and he was very supportive. But even then, the link with my family was still very, very strong. And I just thought, okay, what do I do? Do I be even more selfish and continue my life independently? Or I do go back into the household and see what their reaction was. My partner, very supportively, he says, go back and see what happens. And I was like, oh my God, created all these worst case scenarios. And I was really fortunate, because when I walked through the door, my father says, it's like missing a limb, come back to me. I was really fortunate, but the extended family and my siblings, it was don't talk about it. But I chose to, at that time, it must have been the rebel in me or something, because I went from being very quiet to like, you know what, I don't care. I don't care what the rest of the community think. As long as my parents accepted me, for me, completely and utterly, that's all that mattered. And so when they embraced me, they said that they loved me, that was fine. I said, I don't care what my siblings think. You lead your life, I've got my own life. Extended family, I couldn't care less. And that's the way I've led my life ever since. I have to find it within myself to keep moving forward. On a positive note, I'm still with my partner. He's 21 years older than me. Last week, we celebrated our 24th anniversary. He's White Church of England. He's got the Bible next to him on his bedside cabinet. I'm, Muslim background. I've got the Quran. But we've worked together, and we've had to overcome a lot of prejudices and discrimination and abuse. But the only way to keep moving forward and overcome these izzat, shame, haram, etc., is to say, we are together, we are working together, let's make it work. That's the only way forward.
Absolutely. Actually, your first question just reminded me of I think it's one of the first scenes in Queer as Folk with one of the central characters where he like runs to his friend's family and says, they're gonna kill me, they're gonna kick me out, and like very dramatic, and actually it turns out their parents were completely fine with it and he was just doing it for attention. So I personally can't think of any stories where, you know, people have gone public with it in a way to shame their parents. And I guess maybe it's because that person, maybe they wouldn't be taken so seriously with the allegation. But I think, you know, something like the Daily Mail would blow that in, you know, widely out of proportion and be like, look at those Muslims over there, how barbaric.
To be specific, I wasn't saying to shame their parents. I was just saying that it protects you a little bit because the parents are going, oh shit, if we do anything to this kid, not only the community is actually going to be against us.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I moved back to England with my parents, and you know they'd be like blah blah blah. I'd be like, I'll call Child Protection Services if you touch me. We're not in Iran now. I'm protected. Which I think only like my South Asian and Iranian friends really understand that. I'm not sure that kids here get such a raw deal. I don't know. Do you feel like chapal and like?
I can see some similarities.
Yeah. But moving on to your second question, which was.
Yeah. So you mentioned Helm. So Helm is the granddaddy of all LGBT support groups. It started in Lebanon, early 2000s. And since then, we've now seen a flourishing of LGBT support groups in certain countries. So Lebanon now has a very vibrant scene, which is also interestingly including new groups, which are working with Syrian refugees. Tunisia is the other place that we've seen a real flourishing, birthplace of the Arab Spring. There are now almost 10 groups working. They're very small scale, certainly, and they tend to appeal to a more sort of middle class and educated group, but they certainly are there. And they're not just online, which is interesting. In both Lebanon and in Tunisia, they've actually branched out and they have community outreach. And what's interesting is that in these two places, these groups are also slowly changing, certainly the way the media talk about LGBT. So the classic way that newspapers will describe a homosexual person is shaz, which basically means deviant. And this
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm shaz, fam.
But,
shut up.
Yeah, but this is par for the course. So a group like Helm and its allies, I mean, they've done a fantastic job. They now use the term mithli, which is basically someone who has sex with the same sex. So there has been progress there. But then if you look at other countries, I mean, and I'm going to talk specifically about Egypt, before 2011, we did have a slightly burgeoning LGBT movement, very small groups, completely gone to ground now in this massive government crackdown, particularly on gay men and trans male to female individuals. And largely, not because the government gives a toss about what you do in the bedroom, but because they are busy clamping down on the Muslim Brotherhood, and at the same time they need to show their Islamic street cred, because Egyptians are conservative, and the easiest way to do that is to lash out at a population that people don't particularly approve of, let's say LGBT. And so, you know, it steps forward and steps back in other countries. What I can say, however, is that the LGBT activists, we have them in every country now, some more online than others, but they are incredibly well connected. But the key thing that they are looking for, and they're very, very clear on their aspirations, they are not looking for the freedom to come out. They do not want to have gay pride parades. They don't want to, they will tell you quite clearly what they like about the Western model of sexual rights and what they can do without. What they really want is the freedom to stay in and do as they choose behind closed doors. And that, interestingly, that element of privacy is a central tenet of Islam. We are not supposed to be spying on our neighbors. And so if people want to go back to basics with Sharia, it's important to remind them that is one of the central principles of Islam.
Can't wait to read the rest of your book. It's so cool. I think we have time for one more question. Please, if you have a question, not a comment, keep your hand up.
I was just wondering about gay women in the Muslim community.
Yes,
because
thank
we've
you.
Covered more men. And secondly, very quickly, what can we do as ally to support the cause and help you guys be who you are, really?
So, question is about gay women in Islam.
That's interesting, talking about gay women, because actually some jurists, some of the classical jurists thought lesbianism was okay. Mm-hmm. This is some of the classical jurists. They thought it was actually okay because there's no penetration going on. That's the way the Islamic discourse is kind of centered. So when you said bumming...
I'm sure there is, but
it refers to
they
anal,
don't know about
that.
It
refers to anal sex. Anal sex is the bad thing, right?
Yes.
So actually, there's a word for it, is it?
Sohake. Sohake are women who grind against.
Yeah.
No, I'm not kidding. I mean, that's the origin. But you're right. It's completely Clintonian definition of sex. If it doesn't involve a penis and penetration, well, then it's not really sex. But just very quickly I'm going to talk in the Arab context. I mean, we have support groups. I mean, some very vocal ones for lesbians. I got to tell you, the loneliness of the long-distance lesbian, really. I mean, it's incredibly difficult as a woman, whether you're having sex with your own sex or with the opposite sex outside of marriage. Your sexuality is so controlled in law and by your family that although they're not actually, lesbians, or most of our countries are not on the receiving end of laws which tend to be targeted towards sodomy, but it doesn't matter. Their lives are so much more isolated and lonely because men, gay, straight, you can go out, you're a man. But a woman, you have to stay in. So it is a very, very difficult situation.
You also have this expectation that you have to marry and bear children.
But it's the same for men as well at least in many Arab countries.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I think the bar is open for at least another 20 minutes. So please grab a refreshment, and I'm sure our panelists will be around for further questions. Thank you so much.